Hello, this is Dr. Eric Castleberry, Associate Professor and Program Director of Communication, Media, and Ethics at Mid-America Christian University. I'm here with our COM 4603, Creating Social Media Presence and Cultural Movements interview series. And in the series, we bring in a guest, a working professional, each and every week to engage and hear from them, learn about their various professional experiences, perhaps some of their personal stories, and most importantly, to engage our students in that act of strategic interviewing, as well as some healthy networking, dare we say. It has been an exciting course with a lot of variation, and just blown away for today's opportunity to engage Dr. Andrea Baldwin from the University of Houston at Clear Lake, if I can say that. And she is a full-time faculty member there. But most importantly, for our purposes, we're going to hear about her involvement in the area of performance studies. What is that? How does it work? What does it look like? You know, what does it mean? These are all, a number of loaded questions that she is going to give us some insights into, because she's played a role in all the different layers involved there. And grateful to have you carve out some time in your schedule. You stay quite busy yourself, so appreciate the time. And welcome to the class, Andrea.
Hi, Garrett. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we have student questions, as you know, and you've previewed a lot of those questions. Before we get started with them, would you mind wind the clock back a little bit? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what that journey looked like to ultimately lead you to this this kind of combined role as a faculty member, as a performance artist, and where that started.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm a native Texan, and I was born and raised in Abilene, Texas. And I went to school to get my undergrad at the University of North Texas. And like many of y'all who are college students, you kind of have an idea, but it changes as you have new experiences, or it changes because you realize the skill set is different, or it's calling you in a different way. And I became a comm major there, and part of our comm program was to take classes in both rhetoric, interpersonal and organizational, and performance studies. At the time, I just wanted to be an HR person somewhere, or maybe a speech teacher. But part of taking some of those performance studies classes was that it was fun. It was also engaging, but in those kind of moments of play that we were having in these classes, I was realizing I had a skill set in speaking, I had a skill set in performance, and also that I was able to find ways to make sense of the world in a way that was different than anything I'd ever seen before. And so I wanted to continue on with that. I started performing in shows and productions on campus. I went on and got my master's degree there and continued that particular tradition, and then wanted to take the giant step of getting my PhD because I still felt like I hadn't learned enough yet. And so then I left Texas and I went to the Midwest. I went to Southern Illinois University. And it was at the time, it was very painful because it's different there. Mexican food is not nearly as accessible as I would have liked it to be for 5 years. And they had corn in everything. It was very interesting. But I spent 5 years getting my PhD there and focusing on what performance studies does, but also that meant I was able to teach it, as well as teaching in other variations of communication classes. But all the while I was just very excited to get back to Texas. And so the moment I could come back, the moment I finished my PhD, a job opened up at Houston and I jumped at the chance. And so I've been at the University of Houston Clear Lake for 5 years. My school, UHCL, is a branch of the University of Houston system. And I love teaching here. At the university, I teach public speaking. I also teach what we call a media writing class, which is basically kind of an introduction to how to write, analyze, and discuss what it means to write for the media. So we focus a lot on what it means for the Associated Press. We do lots of like brand management practice there, interviewing practices there, but also lots of like textual media analysis. It's a lot of things encompassed in one. And of course, I teach performance studies there. Prior to my arrival at that institution, they had not had any artistic performing arts in 30 years. They have a 500-seater theater, which is huge, and they weren't even using it. And so whenever they brought me on, they simply said, well, if you do it, we now have it. And so now they have performance studies classes. And like Dr. Castleberry was saying, it is a grass movements process. But all the while I've been in Houston for the past couple of years, I have tried to dip my toe as much as time will allow in other Houston projects. I temporarily served on the board for the Houston Fringe Festival while I'm here. I am also working, I kind of help out with storytelling around the city every now, again, whenever my schedule allows. But for the most part, it allows me to continue to do performance, to find intersections between performance, activism, and all aspects of communication. And that's about where I am.
And it's a lot. Thank you so much. What is amazing about hearing that story is there's even more connectivity than we suggested for the students.
Right.
And that it's incredibly rewarding for you to share that, because we had several questions about writing and writing processes. And I think one of the most significant standout elements just from hearing your opening remarks is that you have been developing an extremely important talent. That's code switching between writing styles, between writing projects. And I see that as a direct relation to what many of our digital marketing and communication students, but really more than that, people moving into the workforce today. While we're moving, let's jump into some student questions. I have, I believe, all of them queued up, and I think, oh no, did I close one out? Let me take a question let me start with a question from Caleb, and we'll kind of work across. Really, for our students, they would lack some basic understanding of what performance studies is, so we also encourage them to try to gain an orientation about what that includes. Let's hear from Caleb.
Okay.
My name is Caleb Rodon. I attend Mid-America Christian University. I'm a senior, and my two questions for you today are, as a lecturer, what main topics do you go over for performance studies? And my second question is going to be, working in many fields, you must bring a lot of social awareness to people. Which field has brought you the most success when it comes to social awareness? Thank you.
Okay, so help us unpack performance studies a little bit, right? What does an introduction course look like, and how do you go about building that type of class?
Sure. Well, in sum, the way that I would define performance studies is basically how we, in the field of communication, it is how we answer communication questions, much like you're doing in a comm class, by what I call embodied learning, right? And that it can encompass a multitude of things, right? Sometimes that is just performing mock interviews. Sometimes it could be just participating in a larger production. Sometimes that includes storytelling or avant-garde performance work. Anything that allows you to embody and perform theory and praxis rather than writing a paper or just reading about it is what we think about it in terms of performance studies, right? So it sounds like it encompasses everything. Most people, when you hear the word performance studies, you think already first and foremost theater, which you would be wrong, but also not wrong. The difference between us and theater is that theater usually has a set amount of scripts. They usually have a set format, right? Your traditional Romeo and Juliet is done a certain way, always and forever, all the time, right? And you know that if you go watch Romeo and Juliet in Norman, Oklahoma, it will be the same as it is in Milwaukee. The difference between performance studies is if you are asking a question about communication, part of it is that you want to start picking it apart and and unleashing it or unhashing it in different ways. So we create performances that allow us to do that sort of work. It's a lot of fun, or I find it to be a lot of fun. To answer your question, some of the things that I always get a lot of first-time performers, and mostly because of my own institution. So for me, an introductory performance studies class it starts with storytelling. And the thing that I always say to all of my students, whether you're in my public speaking class or if you're not my student and we're just meeting for the first time, is that you're always already performing. If you come home after a day's work, remember when we used to do that? If you come home after a day's work and someone asks you, how's your day? You're going to list a sequence of events of how that happened. And if something of big significance happened, you're going to expand that particular aspect of the story, right? So we are constantly always living, experiencing, we know the world through stories. And so the gateway of that is I teach a storytelling class, or I teach a little bit of storytelling in every single class that I teach, because usually that's how we perform first and foremost. And also, especially if you are nervous about public speaking, because I have lots of students that come up and they're like, I like what you're doing, but I don't want to perform to anyone ever, because I've never done it before, right? And that's pretty common. But one of the things I say is like, just get up and tell me about the time that you went to Starbucks and someone bought everyone in the room drinks, right? And people forget that they are in front of an audience, or they forget, or they want, and the more they tell the story, and if they get a little bit of affirmation, now all of a sudden they're putting on a show and they're doing the voices. And getting people to get excited about that is a performance, and we learn that performance as long as we are conscious, right? If I ever get to meet any of y'all in person, I know who your family is, or who's your family. I know who your friends are based on the composite presentation that you give when you tell stories. And so if I can start from there with storytelling, then we can work in other aspects of it, because we learn, like I said before, we learn through stories. And that's how we connect to people, because if you're good at telling stories, other people want to tell you stories. And it's a different way and a more intimate way of engagement. What was the second? Remind me of the second question again.
No, that's all right. I was getting swept up as well.
Working in many fields, you must bring a lot of social awareness to people.
Yes.
Which field has brought you the most success when it comes to social awareness? Thank you.
For me, when it comes to social awareness, and all of performance is about knowing your audience. First and foremost, when I think about what it means in terms of social awareness, or what field or what aspect of communication or education brings about the most active social awareness, I'm going to be very honest with you. It starts with, if you are nervous about it, it starts with face-to-face interaction. And what I mean by that is, whenever we think about social movement, or when we think about social change or whatever, right, the composite image is like, oh, look at me with the picket sign marching around with the megaphone. And that's like maybe 1% of that kind of activism. And it's not like it's effective if you find the right audience, but that's not feasible for everyone else, right? I have found that the most change happens when you are talking to someone face to face, right? And sometimes that practice happens when you're at a kitchen table just hanging out. Or if you happen to be, and I know I'm listing lots of things that were pre-pandemic that we used to do, but work with me here, right? Or whenever you are just even via social media, right? If you can pull someone aside and be like, talk to me, you said something about this, can you explain that to me? Or like, what do you mean when you say blank? And a lot of cases, that's where that change starts to happen. And I see it happen time and time again, because I have lots of first year students who, whenever and most of y'all, whenever you come to college, right, you're with a whole new group of people who have different ideas and different experiences. And so I'm watching them as they listen to other people. And sometimes that's the first time they've heard a different experience, because they've lived in the same house their entire life. So they've only had a set amount of experiences. And now they have one person who just thinks slightly different. And that's enough for them to be like, let me get my phone and Google, what does blank blank mean? And then if they feel comfortable, they'll be like, hey, I like what you said. And even that's enough affirmation to be like, oh, look, now we're changing minds. And also, I think that for many people, that sort of social change is the most accessible, right? Because we think we think about change or we think about activism, we think about like that we need to be every single person in the world needs to be shifting the world. Sometimes if you can just shift the corner where you're in, that's more than enough. And sometimes it's a lot more meaningful.
Absolutely. And you know, and certainly the more polarizing things become, the less, you know, the quicker we get pushed to certain like ideological corners. And I think we're describing in broad strokes, you know, many of these ongoing tensions that we experience. And really the effect of it is, the truth of it is that we are marking social change in those intimate spaces. I love that description, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. That you know that a single outing is not going to, you know, lend you that ultimate, you know, credential in social change. It is an embodied experience. You have a great way with words in articulating these for us, and really just to tie back this significance of intimate exchange. There's a clear connective tissue between what you're talking about as performance of our lives and our stories and things, to what it looks like when you go into or perform an interview setting. We're reading Emily Potter's Interviewing for Journalists or Journalism, but it's one of 3 books, and the larger takeaway of that book is that the interviewing practices and recommendations, the pedagogy of it all, the skill sets, it's not limited to journalists. In fact, it would do us all some good. Now that everyone is an armchair journalist, right, on social media,
Absolutely.
we could all stand to benefit from those fundamental tools. Terrific feedback here. Let's take a question from Haley, or maybe we'll just listen to, let me play her first question, and I'll give you a chance to respond, and we'll continue from there.
Cool.
My first question for you is that we know you've been involved in several organizations and associations, such as the NCA and the SSCA. Can you tell us a little bit about those organizations and how you've been involved with them?
I think I do remember, I've watched all the videos, and so I kind of remember what she's talking about, but I can absolutely barely hear it.
That's all right. Haley was surfacing the topic of organizations you've been involved in. She mentions NCA and SSCA, but we know you're also deeply involved in Petit-Jean, Patty Pace. So talk about the interrelationship of these organizations. What kinds of roles have you played? Because I think that's where student questions were coming from in terms of event management. Students were it's your other Zoom meeting, right? Hailing you.
My phone is connected, and someone just decided to call me, and no one ever calls me, ever, until right now. I am so sorry.
You're always already on Zoom, as to use that word. But you've done event planning.
I have.
Within the context of performance studies. And I think that's really special, and I'd love for you to share more about that. And I'm not taking room. Haley is interested as well to hear about that.
Of course. Like you've mentioned, I have been a part of, I work in, not necessarily administration, but I was voted into some administrative roles for the National Communication Association, which is NCA. I have also worked for, and I've also chaired a division at Southern States Communication, which is SSCA. I have also helped plan the Petit-Jean Performance Festival multiple years. A year and a half ago, I also led the festival, which was very exciting. And I've also helped plan Patty Pace, which is a traveling festival. And I am also working right now to bring that festival, hopefully pandemic pending, to Houston as well. And what I love about being a part of performance studies is that even if you are not just a like performer type, extroverted type person, to create any kind of production, it takes all hands on deck, which means it is 100%, as Dr. Castleberry said, it's 100% event planning. 100%. And I can name countless productions where I've had people who consider themselves deep introverts who were essential to the performance studies practice because they were so good at organizing, or they were so good at financing, or they were so good at other planning aspects that it did not involve being on the stage. Now, in regards to answer Haley's question, in some of the roles that I have done and what it's like to be a part of it, this year I'm the at-large member for the Performance Studies Division, which means I help organize and create our business meeting every year for our National Conference for Performance Studies. Our division has about 379, I had to look this number up, 379 active members. There's probably more that show up who just don't pay dues. But I'm in charge of creating the ballot so that we establish or vote or advocate for new leadership every year. A lot of that, I think I got those positions, and I'll say this just kind of blanketed everything. I got those positions because I learned I know how to be a good group communicator. And I just taught this lesson on group communication in one of my classes. At any given time, you have to understand that you can be any part of the archetype of whatever group work situation is. Sometimes at one point in your life, you may be the super bossy one. At one point in your life in a group, you may be the slacker. At one point in your life, you may be the one that really wants to be active but doesn't have it together. Part of being a good leader means that I'm aware that every time I work with a group of people, that they're all either going to perform one of those roles or multiple of those roles in the process. And I've done that time and time again prior to getting those positions. And I think they were just like, well, every time people talk to you, they don't want to fight each other. So please, please be a leader for us. And you're on top of your stuff, which is a good thing. This past year, prior to the pandemic, I chaired the division, which means I planned the entire division, the entire Southern Conference for Performance Studies. However, COVID-19 came in, so we didn't actually have the conference. But what it means is that I have to survey, organize, and look at all the aspects of every single panel that's coming in from the Southern region, which is about 150 constituents, and that's not including the students who also apply and outside scholars that also come in. And so there's lots of filtering and negotiating that happens there. And it's fun, but it's not nearly as fun as planning just performance festivals, mostly because they're near and dear to my heart. I also really enjoy working with artists and also really enjoy the process of trying to help someone's vision come true, which is what that kind of organizational work is. It means that even though I can be in an authoritative position, I can allow this artist or allow whatever school's production to be like, okay, just tell me what you need. And here's what we have, and how do we make a lot of this work? And it's fun to think about. And I learned this skill set when I was even prior to me coming to the academy, prior to me even going to college, that I liked being a part of the nooks and crannies of putting something together, which is why I enjoy productions. I enjoy watching people plan weddings, watching people plan baby showers. Sometimes I don't want to do it, but I really like watching or hearing about the process. And this is a side note, it's a little on yacht, but I feel like for each person, there are many experiences in your life where you're like, oh, I have this skill set, that whenever you find the career that you want, you're like, oh, I've had this skill set forever because I've always wanted to plan stuff. And look at me planning things now. But it also means that I get to have grace for people whenever they fall short of things. But it also means that I get to be a small part of big things all of the time. But a lot of that is because it's me being hyper aware of my audience at any given time, where I can tell by nuances of emails or nuances of nonverbal context of who's doing what. And I can read the situation to be like, all right, let's try to adjust things to make things happen. But it's something that I'm good at, but I also really love.
Given so many of these organizational experiences within the context of other people that are involved in performance studies as well, I'm reminded of auteur theory, but the idea of artists and their passions. And one can imagine, while working with plenty of professionals and semi-professionals here that share that passion for their craft, this could have the potential of navigating various colorful personalities, right? With different approaches
You're so
to
sweet to say it that way.
art. I was working really hard on that. What is there a story or technique? You know, how do you thrive amidst some of the more chaotic personalities that you might encounter?
A lot of it is prep work at the very beginning. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit while my catalog pulls up a good story. It's a little bit of prep in the beginning. If I can anticipate like getting as much done before the artist comes in, then I always feel like if I'm at least 80% prepared, then 20% of it can either be just really easy, or that's where they will flip out and do the absolute most. When I was at Southern Illinois University, we had a world-renowned performance artist come in. Very, very big deal. And it was very, very exciting. And I worked in the theater at the time. I was a publicity director for that theater. But the artist comes, it's great. And the artist has been there before, so knows the theater, but the visit was starting to crumble very slightly because first it was the lights. The lights didn't work out the way that they did. Oh, the floor is not clean enough. So we start vacuuming, the dust comes up. And now the artist is very upset because they have respiratory problems and they didn't authorize for a cleanup, even though they did. And the list went on, and everything in my body was just like, I would like to just scream right now. I knew that I still had a job to do. And so once we were and my job was like, because I could see the rest of the staff was like, I'm ready to leave. I'm just going to throw everything down and leave. I had to be the one to kind of round up and be like, why don't you guys go do your stuff? And I'll talk to the artist. And I came in and I had my iPad and I was like, here's some and I framed it in a way that was like non-direct, but like still direct, where I was like, so just wanted to double check all the things that we have for you. Here's some of the things in your agreement that we agreed upon. Is there, what else are we missing here? And in the agreement, right, it said the lights, which checked the light situation. It checked that we were not supposed to vacuum for 2 weeks beforehand. And a lot of the things that the artist was flipping out about, it came in that balance. I was like, we're doing all of these things. I was like, what else do we need here? And it wasn't accusatory, but it was simply just a way to kind of to address the issue, but without diffusing. And surely it came out to be like, oh, like my dog just died. And that's really what was the root of all of that situation. And I didn't have to like go in and be direct and be like, hey, why are you being so mean? It was just a way to kind of diffuse. And we've also, the fun thing about working with people who are less than stellar or people who are very different is that they keep you on your toes. And as long as what I've always learned being a director, being a teacher, being in charge of anything is I always have an 80% 20 rule where I'm like, if I can be at least 80% prepared, the 20% will always be chaos. So I have a little wiggle room in case something runs late, or I have a little wiggle room in case something falls apart, or I have a little wiggle room that even if if I've done everything, we still have this extra stuff, and maybe I didn't need that extra plan. So that's been my experience with that.
I love this. You literally worked with a list of demands, right? That's as real as it gets. Let me queue up Haley's other question for us. Hopefully I've got the volume turned up enough this time.
Okay, I'm just going to zoom in.
Tell me about a time when you have faced challenge in the world of performance. How did you overcome it?
We just did this. We instinctively we worked that question right in.
Yes, we did.
To it. We both had it on our collective unconscious because we'd screened these questions in advance, which you just did. And ideally, I want to leave room for everyone's questions, but it's possible additional stories will circulate into your responses. While you were talking, it did bring to mind a question from Tia. I believe her first question has more to do with your process, but the second question does tie into this organizational nature that I think is right on par with what we're discussing. So let me play her first and then second question.
Okay.
My name is Tia. Thank you for your time today. My first question is, among all the characters you have played, could you describe one of your favorite characters that you played? And when you get a new character, what do you do to shape the character?
Okay, so as we hopefully will begin to understand, you're not always just playing certain types of characters, right? It's
No.
bigger than that. So talk to
Yeah.
us about some of the characters that.
This is one of my favorite questions because no one has ever asked me that, to be honest with you. I've been doing this for a while and no one has asked me what my favorite character is. And I'll be honest, I saw these videos early this morning and I was doing other stuff and I was like, this is the one where I kept every like 10 minutes. I was like, no, but what about this one? No, what about this one? No, what about this one? The one that I'm going to settle on I was in a production called Contagion, or the Sad Case of the Performance Artist Critic. Dr. Castleberry, I think you saw this one. And I was the angel. My role was the angel of performance history. And I got to kind of like, in kind of a weird like Christmas Story Ichabod Crane type way, I got to lead a critic through the phases of like performance studies, but I could be as mean as I wanted to be because I was also a very tired angel. And it was the most fun for me because usually I'm kind of an extrovert. I usually play either hyper-femme characters or characters who I'm usually either a narrator because I can carry a story very, very well. And rarely do I get to play a mean character or a dark character. So it was fun to kind of, and I got to like hit the guy on the head multiple times. I got to push him around. I got to just look at him with like absolute disdain. And it was delightful because it tapped into a side of me. Usually I try to think of myself as like kind of not necessarily sweet, but like a warm person. And so it was a fun challenge to like go to a cold part of me. And to answer the second part of the question, anytime I get ready for a character, and I say this also to my own students as well, is that there are references all around you. You just have to start looking for it. In the same way that all of us as communicators, like we learn how to communicate by watching other people, right? You didn't come into the world and you're like, all right, this is who I am and this is exactly how I communicate. You either observed people who raised you or friends you were around or the culture you're around, and that creates the experience, right? It's the same thing when you do performance studies work. It's just a heightened experience of that. Whenever I kind of reference a role, the pull of reference is usually TV or movies, because then I can talk to it's a commonality. Then I can talk to the director where I was like, do you remember this scene in this movie? I'm trying to like tap into this whenever I'm doing something. I was in a particular role where I got to play a very sad ballerina and that ballerina dies. And the point of reference was, I can't believe I just mentioned Romeo and Juliet, but it was Baz Luhrmann's version of Romeo and Juliet with like Claire Danes and Leo. And I was like, I want to talk, it's the particular scene right before she, I hope I'm not ruining yeah, for you guys.
Alert on this,
die.
one of the oldest romantic tragedies in history.
And I'm referencing the way that she like washes grief over her face, right? And the great thing about when I pull references from those experiences, or if I'm pulling it from my own life, is it allows me to really slow down those moments of like first of all, why is it significant to me? And how is it significant to me? And how do I recreate those particular experiences, right? Because, the theory is called Stanislavski, where what he wants you to do with that theory is like, if you want you to be sad, but a particular type of sad, we'll talk about like, do you remember a time where you felt sad about something? How does it feel on your body? How does it feel whenever it bubbles up? And then we try to recreate it by using different words, right? I can be in that moment of sadness or happy or anger or confusion, and then I recreate it elsewhere, right? And so whenever I was doing that particular role where I had to die, and I've died on stage, but like usually it's like spectacular and like, or I fall off or whatever, but not like a slow, very like fade into the existence, like washing over grief of like, it's time for me to go. And it takes a moment to like slow down for that. What I love about character creation on stage is that it teaches me a lot about who I am. And I know that many of you probably, because this is a media, because I know because Dr. Castleberry is your professor, I know you talk about media, I know you talk about shows and movies, and what they mean to you. I know him, and what they mean to you, right? When you think about those scenes that mean something to you, usually sometimes it's a little bit of a reflection where it's tapping into something that either you're not ready to address, or you're connecting to it in a weird way or something of that nature, or it reminds you of something. And we do this over and over again. I'm on a diatribe here, right? We can think about this again. Like if you think about a song that you knew when you were a kid or whatever, or that was like your first love. When you hear it now, you can go back to that memory a little bit, and it brings up a different type of like energy in your body. And what I love about performance, what I love about it is that it's one thing to write about it, because that's an emotional labor, right? To analyze it, put it on paper, but to embody it means that you have to put it on. Which is a different type of intense emotional labor. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it is euphoric, but it is always educational for me.
No, thank you. And I'm kind of swept up in your words, and just thinking about some of the live performances that I've been entertained as audience member, are so much more intimate than those, than the film experience, than the celluloid experience of a movie theater. And I know sometimes we connect, or sometimes we might shed a tear or feel the adrenaline rush in a movie, but what gets gained, or what's not maybe recognized as publicly in a performance studies context, is that there is a raw energy, and that certain aspects of production design and mise en scène and whatever are stripped away, and there's something being revealed to you even when it's concealed by these performers, and that's that's a really special experience, worthy of it. But there's not just the performance that goes into these. There are all of the roles behind the scenes, and I think that's where Gia's next question comes from.
And the second question is, from your past experience, I know that you have a lot of literary readings, performances, professional activities, publications, and awards. So could you tell me how to manage your time for different works? Thank you.
All right. How do you keep it all together if there's so many various tasks?
It takes a lot, and it takes and I'm going to be very transparent. It takes trial and error. And what may work for you right now may not work in 5 years, or what may work for you for one project does not work for the next. So the first step I think about management is you need to be malleable. And know that even if you have a plan, that plan will not be iron. It's not a cookie cutter plan that's going to work for every project, every experience, every production. A way that helps me manage a lot of my own time is I try to limit myself. This is going to sound silly, but I try to limit myself to an 8-hour day. Regardless of it, right? Because I limit myself to an 8-hour day, especially, look at you, especially if I love it. Because if we love something, if we adore something, we're going to spend every waking moment, if we want to, on it. But even still, I'm like, okay, all right, if you started this at 9 in the morning, you are at 5 o'clock, we are done. We have to go do something else, because your brain needs to congeal. Your brain needs to like rest and like get away from it. And even if, and one of my mentors, Craig Ginger-Chilbrook, always says this about writing, where he's like, even if you're not writing, you're still writing. And it's true, even if you're not working on the project, it's still back here in the back of your head. And so it's totally okay, like, but it's not in the forefront. So the first thing I do is I try to limit myself to an 8-hour day to get it balanced in regards to that. And then even if I'm having a slow day where I don't want to work on anything, or if I'm like, I'm beating my head against the laptop at 5 o'clock, then I'm like, all right, you tried. You spent 8 hours trying on something, and sometimes that matters. That works as well. But whenever I am in production mode, which is like event planning or whatever, I try to make sure that I make sure that I kind of uptick my own care whenever I am down. So and I say this to my students, I say this to my cast members as well, right? It's not like I have to have a lifestyle change. I'm just like, all right, if I've been living off of coffee and Monster, a sip of water would probably be great. If I've only been living off of like McDonald's fries and bagel bites, a green vegetable every now and then would be good, right? Just a little bit, like try to make sure that I'm taking care of myself during that time, but also that if I can keep things in little pockets, that helps the most part, right? I can keep all of my teaching in one aspect of a pocket during my production days. And I know during those times where I'm like, even though I'm thinking about those bigger projects, that once it's 5 o'clock, from 5 to 10 and at 10 at night, then I can literally just go hog wild on the production itself. But at 10 o'clock, time to go home. And catch up on whatever was on my TV, right? And it's honoring the time that you are down, but also like it allows you to have richer time and more effective time whenever you're working on those productions. But again, that it's completely malleable. Be malleable with it, because sometimes like that works, and sometimes it is like, okay, for 72 hours, you have to be all about this production, and that's it. Or something, and it happens, but like it's about malleability, but it's about whenever you are down, you are down.
That's great advice, and really for so many of our students, they're transitioning. We have several seniors in the class, and they'll be looking at kind of advancing to a new corporate lifestyle soon. And I can recall that I had plenty of jobs during college, all of them part-time. Well, maybe one, my victory lap year wasn't, but when that first time I took a real, what a misused term, 9 to 5, or like, I wish all jobs began at 9 a.m. But that first career position, there was a brutal adjustment period, and there needed to be some establishment of those guidelines to just kind of help us orient into that. I appreciate the philosophy that you're sharing. How appropriate to this context of where so many of us are at right now, working in a remote lifestyle, working from home, and the necessity for mental health and stability and continuity, and to avoid burnout, that we do practice, as you say, limitations, even if it's our area of passion.
Because it can be a slippery slope. Like I mean, I think about whenever I first, we were, Dr. Castleberry and I both got our masters at the same spot, like, and I would, when I say trial and error, I would be on campus from 8 in the morning. Please do not do this. From 8 in the morning to like 9, 10 at night. And because after class, I would just stay and just be like, I have to get everything done. And if I'm not working in the middle of the night, then I'm not like going to grow. But then I became a hot mess. And then there were some issues with like bagel bites and whatever, because that's all I was living off of in coffee. And it was not cute at all. And I was like, this is not sustainable. And I am suffering for what? No one, just me. And then one of my professors was like, yeah, go home, go to sleep. And lo and behold, the next morning I was like, okay, all right. And I was still passionate. I was still productive in the things that I liked. It was more impactful because I was able to step away from it from a bit.
I'm reminded of director David Lynch, who has a very unique style as a filmmaker, as an artist. He's a professional artist as much as he's a filmmaker, and I've heard in numerous interviews with him his stress about questions may arise about the nature of many of his darker, fragmented narratives and these sort of tortured soul characters, and interviewees or interviewers attempting to kind of pull out some dramatic catharsis from him, and what he consistently reveals is he is not a tortured person. He does not have a kind of frightened existence. He's not fatalistic. In fact, he sees it as antithetical to getting the best out of your art. And so, they're even amongst the stranger surrealist artists, a recognition that sometimes your best workflow isn't going to come from simply burning yourself out of a kind of fear or panic or concern that if you're not doing that, you're somehow cheating the project in any given task. Let me play a question from Aaliyah. She has a couple of quick questions here. As we shift gears, I think we're going to get into some questions that go from a broader approach to talking maybe about performance studies, organizational work, to some of your work that you've been involved in. I'm excited to hear about that.
Hello, my name is Aaliyah Watts, and my question for you, Andrew, would be, could you describe how you impact the world using social activism? And my second question for you would be,
all right, well, let's pause there. How can a performance studies project advance social causes?
It's about understanding the medium and moving with intentionality. And here's what I mean. I'm gonna talk first about what it means to understand the medium, and then I'm gonna talk about what it means to move with intentionality. When I say understand the medium, your particular demographic is very fortunate because you have grown up with social media. You know the ins and outs of it, and have your finger on the pulse before a trend can even occur, right? And I'm saying this as someone who's only like slightly older than you. As you get older, it will get harder to keep up on those trends. And then when we think about people like our parents, it will really be hard. And at one point, you will be a generation that might be obsolete, but you can still interact with it. It is about knowing where you can stand on that particular medium, right? If I'm someone who's only slightly like 5 minutes older than most of y'all, everyone in the class, right? I'm not going to be able, as an activist, I'm not going to be able to reach people by doing TikTok dances. That's just not my demographic, period. But I recognize it and I can honor it. And I think that is really fantastic, right? But I also know where those limitations lie, but it's always about knowing your audience and knowing how I'm going to be able to connect with them. Now, when I think about intentionality in terms of activist work, again, it goes first by knowing your audience, but also knowing how impactful do I want to be? Because sometimes when we think about being an advocate or activist for something, we think we have to speak up every single time, or just word vomit or like content vomit every single time, multiple times a day in order to get it. But I have found in my experience as an artist, it takes, if I can really think about it and curate it just right, it can take one post and then boom, wildfire can occur. And I'm gonna use the example about Instagram. I have two examples from Instagram and Facebook. Facebook I kind of use in terms of like writing my experiences in connection to a piece of artwork or a piece of like, or an article or something. And a lot of that is, I think about, instead of like just being like, oh, I'm mad about this, or oh, we should do something about this, I talk about my own experiences first. And then I talk about the thing or the feeling. But I try to craft it, think about it over and over again. But it's the same thing, like I said, right? I'm able to step away from it, which means if I see it, I'm not reactionary to it. I see it first and I'm like, what do I want to say? And how do I want to say it? And what can I say here, or what can I do here where it's going to have the most impact for the punch, right? And part of that is also practice. I've been doing this for a little bit now, so I know exactly what words to say and how to frame my own voice where I can find it impactful via Facebook. It is not, as many of y'all know, because you're on social media, it is imperfect. It is not ironclad every single time because people can do the most. But I found that to be the most effective. When it comes to a visual medium like Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok even, if you will, right? It's the same process where I find that I'm reactionary to it. I take like a second or whatever before, because sometimes I want to just respond, or I'm angry. I take a second and I'm like, what would be an interesting way for me to respond effectively here and have the most palpability, right? And sometimes it is just me posting either a picture of like me somewhere in Houston, or a friend in Houston, or sometimes it's a picture of myself, depending on the context, right? Because the great thing about being a comm scholar or understanding communication is, it moves in layers. So if I can speak in a layered voice where I can connect to people who are way older than me, people who are younger than me, people who are my age but don't have my own experiences, people who live in rural areas areas who do not live in a big city like Houston, right? If I can find an image that can speak to or do some of that work without like hitting people over the head with it, then it's effective, right? But it also means if I'm going to be effective when it comes to my social activism, that I am also consuming. This doesn't mean that you are like always online, if you will, but it means that when you are, or we're in a pandemic, so you're probably always online, but it means that when you are looking at things, you are looking at things with a little bit of yes, to like pass time, but also with a little bit of critical context, because particularly whenever you're looking at something like Instagram or TikTok or whatever, if you're just thumbing through stuff, you're seeing the things that you like, or you're seeing things that are innovative, and you're like, oh, if it speaks to you, sit with it and be like, why does this particular image speak to me? Or why does this, why am I angry right now? Or why am I excited right now? And really get to the very point. Don't just be like, I liked it because it's good. Move past that and articulate why it's good, right? Because sometimes we can be, and sometimes that's good too, right? Just to be like, oh, that was funny. Next. But thinking about the balance in regards to that, it's, for me, it's always, it comes down to the core of like knowing my medium and knowing my intentionality. Now, I am one person who is an artist, and I know many other people who they just want to like blanket the internet all of the time. Intentionality for me, it seems to reach more people. It seems to also, which matters a lot to me, it leaves people seem to be more open to want to have dialogue. And dialogue for me spells out social change, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You know, too often, we're talking to so many all the time. And I think for those of you mentioned this example of being on social media, you know, all the time, we get inundated with mediated messages, especially if we're living in an increasingly isolated, kind of a socially distant world. And on one hand, many of our messages are so heavily tailored, right, to sound perfect, that they communicate robotic qualities, to put it mildly. On the other hand, we obviously see people with zero filter that need their cell phones or whatever taken away from them, and that's part of the problem too. But just being able to kind of conversationally articulate the position as you have is just such a refreshing drink to take in here. Aaliyah has a second question that I think is going to move us ever closer to the body of work of Dr. Baldwin.
How do you feel being a solo performer has helped you creatively? Thank you.
Yeah. Solo performance is, in my experience, terrifying. And I am saying that with so much grace and love as someone who really enjoys that work. It's terrifying because the great thing about group work is that if something goes wrong, it's their fault, right? We can point at so many other factors very quickly. But when it is just you, it's just you, right? You're the one that takes a lot of that pressure. But also I found it to be freeing as well, because I don't have to like collaborate or like check with another person. I'm like, all right, I didn't like that part. I'm going to keep going. But it also meant that I had to feel free and comfortable enough to tell my own story, which meant the challenge was, what was terrifying is I had to sit alone a lot. And, you know, usually when I sit alone and I'm writing, especially because y'all are college students, you're just kind of pumping stuff out and you can go. When it's you and your thoughts, you can just go nonstop. And sometimes that can be a really kind of scary place, but like, I was able to, whenever especially writing from an autoethnographic experience, I was able to kind of like, I set a lot of timed writing experiences where I'm like, okay, today's the day you get to write about your grandma and your mom, which was the hardest scene for me to write. You're going to have 25 minutes. And even if I'm going to set the clock for 25 minutes, even if you just ugly cry in front of your laptop, once that 25 minutes is up, okay, goodbye. And it's fine. But getting through that process allowed me to think truly and hash out truly why certain things were very important to me. Why was I so emotional about telling stories about my grandmother and my mother? what did I learn from those particular experiences? And I did it as I was preparing for the show every day, walked at least for 10, 15 minutes, looked at the script every day, looked at my own experiences, even if I was just writing in like little bullet points where I'm like, oh, here's a story about my grandma. Oh, I'm sad. Here's this one part about Beyonce. That's really wonderful. Do you remember that time you went to, and now it's like 5 pages of just me rambling. Where just because I got it out, it made me feel comfortable about myself in a way that nothing has ever truly made me feel comfortable. And I'm saying that with so much like honesty. It's not that I've never been comfortable before, but there is something very cathartic about solo performance that allowed me to be like, no, this is all of me. And that's really peaceful. But it did mean that I had to drag myself through the fire multiple times, or just even, it was hard to even get started sometimes to do that work. And we can think about how this translates to any of y'all who are going into the job market, right? Some of you will go get corporate jobs, or some of you will be like, you know what, I'm just gonna freelance and I'm gonna do stuff myself. All of that is terrifying. Because we are used to having someone have a blueprint in front of us of like, okay, and now you've done this, so now you should do this. When you are doing any kind of solo work, whether it's a job or a solo show or whatever, they're like, all right, are you going to do the thing by yourself? Goodbye, go ahead. And that can be, and just the first step is like, what happens, right? Or I always think about like when in Finding Nemo, whenever the like rest of the fish go into the ocean, they're all in bags and they're like, we did it. Now what? That's what it feels like all of the time. But once you take that step, you just keep rolling. And it's really, I found it to be a very peaceful experience.
I would contend that one of the most difficult tensions that young professionals will face, particularly in the world of marketing and advertising, as I faced when I went into it, was any creator has a vision, and with it comes a certain level of ego and a belief that our idea is somehow, the perfect form, flawless in its parts, and anything outside of that, any way that someone comes in and tampers with it, is a complete collapse of our vision for that. When in fact, we're so young and raw, right? These new professionals, you need these collaborative voices to put your ideas in check, to help translate them in a realistic sense. And there were times early on when I was too inexperienced and naive to appreciate the responsibilities that people over you represent. They're more of that gatekeeper role. They understand what the past looks like, and even though you're trying to perhaps bring new ideas to the table, they still have a greater obligation to the brand, to the legacy of the company than you do. And I think learning how to be appreciative of that collaborative process is extremely beneficial. Let's relate it to an intimate level, just something on social media. You ever fire something out super fast and perhaps it was emotionally charged, and how quickly do you have a knee-jerk sense to delete it or immediately edit it? That's one of the dangers of something like Twitter, is people just fire it off and it doesn't have that editing mechanism. Or for public figures, they can't delete it fast enough. Someone's out there already screenshotting it to like exploit them with later. And I think that's, we're both kind of suggesting a word of caution, being open to that invitation. And you of all people would be able to talk about and celebrate the value of these collaborative environments, right?
Well, and part of that openness in any aspect of it is also you have to have grace for yourself. Because no one is perfect. And there'll be times, even on a personal level, right? Like you throw that thing out on social media and you get it wrong. I mean, just knock down, drag out wrong. That has happened to me before, where I posted something, put my phone in my pocket, I'm doing stuff, and I can just feel the vibration of like people responding to stuff. And I look and it's just like, so-and-so has responded, so-and-so has responded, and I'm like, oh no. I know how that feels, but you also have to give yourself a little bit of grace for that, because I think the great thing about wanting to be an effective communicator or wanting to do anything by yourself is you have to give yourself the grace and the freedom for when you are going to get it like flying, like out of body experience amazingly well, and also knock down, drag out, and friendship wrong. You have to have the balance for both. And part of that is just having a little bit of malleability for that, because if you don't have that malleability, how do you know that you're going to grow? How do you not leave yourself room for that kind of growth?
Well, let's continue with our own growth curve here. I want to hear from Rebecca, has a pair of questions.
Cool.
Hello, Dr. Waldman. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Cummings, and I'm a senior here at Mid-American Christian University. My first question for you is, in the introduction of your interview with Houstonia Magazine, Catherine Matasso writes, "We expected she would be an excellent interview, and we were right. What suggestions would you have for your making yourself stand out in an interview?"
Okay, here we are. We're midway through an interview, and
This is an excellent question, and it's one that we talk about a lot in my own classes. But part of what, and I remember reading whenever that article came back and reading it, I remember that particular experience, and it felt just like from the moment we started talking, it felt like we were just having a conversation. For a while, I just forgot that we were in an interview for a major state magazine. And so I was very humbled whenever I first saw that opening statement. Some of the things that when you're thinking about interviewing, for me, here's a couple of tips that I can give to you. Every time you go into an interview, always remember that everybody who is in the interview, the interviewee and the interviewer, want the same thing. You don't want to sound silly and you want it to go well. The interviewer wants it to go well. They just want to do their job, right? And when we think about it in those high stakes situations, particularly for job interviews, same thing. Everybody wants the same thing. You would like to be hired. They would like to hire you so they can stop being in the hiring process, right? If you go into an interview with that kind of mindset of everybody wants the same thing, it helps take a little bit of the edge off. And the other thing, and this is going to sound cliche, but then I'm going to get specific about it. The second thing is be yourself. You see how it sounds very existential and like weird to say that, right? Like because some of you may be watching this and you're like, I don't know who I am, which is okay. When I say be yourself, whoever you are right now, because as someone who has been on the other side of the interviewing process, we can spot at 20 paces when somebody has manufactured and when someone has is super stylized and robotic, and we get annoyed by it. We love people who feel comfortable, people who are comfortable and know themselves. Those are the people that are memorable and that are really palpable to us. And I'm speaking because I know many of you are about to be on the job market aspect of it. When I've been on hiring committees, we've seen people who are everyone has the same qualifications. Everybody could get the job just on paper alone. It's how you are in that face-to-face situation. And usually those are the people who move on where they're like, I like when they talked about this thing and how they talked about it, right? That memorability will move you much further. And it comes to the third point that I'm going to say. You are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. And I'm saying that in a personal aspect, right, what I'm doing here, but also on that high stakes, get a job situation here. You should be asking questions. You should be thinking about, is this a fit? Or am I answering a question? Or are people engaged? It's always, interviewing is, when we think about it as a one way. It is consistently dialogic. And if I'm speaking about it, because some of you are hearing this, and that's great, but I know you're also like, what about the job part? Here comes the job part. When you are in the dialogic communication situation for a job, and the big thing is you have to think about the mindset of the person who's interviewing you. They are looking, as much as you're like, please, oh, sorry, this is my dog. I don't know why you just decided to sit here. This is Jojo Handsome. He just got a haircut. Please get out of the picture so I can make my point. Thank you. My goodness. I don't know why he did that.
He's interviewing for his own YouTube channel, apparently.
He's like, please please follow me on Instagram. But one of the things in interview situations is think about who the interviewer is, right? And the person who is interviewing people for jobs, they are looking for someone who is qualified, but they are looking, even if it doesn't say it on the job description, they're looking for someone who they won't mind seeing for the next 30 years. Who they wouldn't, and it doesn't mean they're looking for a best friend. They're looking for someone they wouldn't want to push out of a window every day. They are looking for someone who they're probably going to see at office birthday parties or go to meetings or lunches with for the next 30 years, right? And that doesn't mean you have to play to their interests, but it does mean show them that you're a human being that can be tolerable. That is somewhat functional. Does that mean that you have to hide all the kooky things that you are? No, it does not. But it means that you are, if you're doing the second thing, or the first thing, you're looking to see if that job is a fit for you too. So those are a couple of tips. But I also find the longer than here you are again, and this is his bone. We're just going to work with it. I also find that when it comes to interviewing, I'll take that. Thank you so much. Okay, or not. When it comes to interviewing, the more you are whoever you are, it's charming, it is memorable. But also, if you know you're going to be interviewed, start thinking about narrative experiences, because again, people are wooed and won time and time again by stories. You can, each and every one of you, think about all the friends that you have, and how whenever you think about the experiences you've had, who is telling stories or who are a part of those stories, right? And how you want to continue to be a part of someone's narrative based on the experiences they've had in the past. And so start thinking, it doesn't mean that you have to come out and be like, once upon a time, and please don't do that in an interview, that's weird. But it does mean that if you are comfortable with who you are and how you tell your own story, that speaks volumes. That's it.
I'm reminded of I'm trying to remember if this is real life or a fantasy, like a media, like a TV show or something. Where someone was telling a story about them. It was real life. They said, "I want to tell you all about a special girl," and then just proceeded to cryptically give a third person revelation about themselves, right, and this sort of thing. No, we don't recommend that. But I love what you had to say. Agree, and in fact, we've imparted some of that wisdom. So it's great to receive that repetition here. Rebecca has an additional question that I have ready to go.
All right.
My second question is, what inspired the beaten up dust and open Texas fields in your flyer for Lone Star Fitness? Thank you.
Listen, Dr. Castleberry, I'm just going to give it to you this is just a little extra. I'm so impressed by your students' questions.
Right.
I'm dazzled by it. Good job. That's a good reflection on you, but also, yay, you guys are so smart and I love it. It's all about imagery, right? And so whenever I was preparing for the show was already written. And so I was trying to figure out what's a good image. I knew I had to be in it. I had to think back to one of the catalysts for me writing the show. And really what it was is I had a colleague of mine who was from California, that kind of just word vomits all the time, but said something very condescending to the of oh my goodness, I would be ashamed if I was from Texas or if I was from the South. How disgusting. And I took that nugget and I was like, oh, okay, bet. Let me show you. And it wasn't a big look to her, but it was an inspiration of why do people think that Texas is this awful place? Or why do people think that the South is just this horrifying place where we don't have shoes and we all ride a horse and all of these things? And so when I was thinking about that image, I wanted to think about where I came from. I come from West Texas, and I know that most of y'all are in Oklahoma, and I've driven through Oklahoma. I've been to Oklahoma multiple times. And so West Texas kind of looks a little bit like the western, central western side of Oklahoma, right? Kind of frontiery, grasslandy, whatever. We get
Absolutely.
a lot of that.
Very true.
And so it's always big spaces, and it's big spaces with like dilapidated things here and there, right? The old outhouse or the old like farmhouse that like no has not been torn down, but like it's just on its last leg, right? That as a kid I would be like, why would they tear it down? But now as an adult who is writing about that experience, I'm like, no, that's a part of my memory, right? And so that I knew that I wanted to have big space, dilapidated something. I went on a writing retreat to Marfa, and if you know anything about Marfa, Marfa is like it's a town of like 40 people maybe, but it's in far west Texas, and it's like it's a huge artsy capital. If you know Bourdain in his final episode did a part of far west Texas, and in Alpine, Texas, where Sul Ross University is, there is a hill behind the university, and we heard this because I originally was just going to take my picture on some country road out there. About this like desk on a hill that has been up there since the 70s. And I'm not a hiker. I am not an outdoorsy person whatsoever. Far from. My like favorite idea of camping is it a house with air conditioning, running water and electricity, and does it happen to be in the woods? That's what I do. I don't do like, so hiking, none of that. But I was like, well, I do want, that could be a really great picture. So 45 minutes all the way up this hill, which is a hill. And we find this spot, and so we took the picture, and I was like, well, it'll be fun. Maybe it'll be great for the Instagram. But the longer I kept looking at that picture, it encompasses the way that I am standing, the way that I'm looking, the way the desk is seated. It encompasses so much about what Texas, being a Texan means to me, what being a woman of color means to me, but particularly because it's a desk and because I am leaning up at the front of the desk, what it means to be an educator. Because if you've been in a college campus, that's the universal spot for I'm a professor and I'm about to give announcements. Spot, right? So it became beautiful and serendipitous in those moments. And no one, I've done the show all over this country, has and appeared in many like student magazines, has ever asked me that question. It's really magnificent. So that's how that came about.
It's a scoop. We've got an exclusive, a nice visually semiotic question. Great job, Rebecca. We are closing in on some of our final questions.
Cool.
And I believe we have Avery, who's going to clean things up for us. All right. No, wait. I'm sorry. Where'd she go? Tommy. Yeah, that's right. I had Tommy queued up, and then we'll close with Avery. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Baldwin. Hi, Dr. Castleberry. This is Tommy, and I have some questions for you, Dr. Baldwin. In Lone Star Feminist, you highlight famous women. In what ways do you relate to each woman?
I had in Lone Star Feminists, I connected myself to several women in Texas history. So I started with Ann Richards, who was the first woman governor. Also Wendy Davis, who ran for governor and is also running for a House seat, as I know right now. Leticia Vandeputte, who ran with Lieutenant Governor, who is a Hispanic woman from San Antonio. Barbara Jordan, who is a well-known, well-loved senator. I happen to live in her district right now in Houston. And of course, my star, Beyonce Chazelle Knowles Carter. And then of course, my mother and my grandmother. The way that I relate in the show, the way that I relate to each of them is the first way that I relate to all of these characters is how I first approached them or how I first got to know who they were, right? When Ann Richards was running for governor, I was a wee, like, small human. So I only knew enough about how it made my teachers feel and what my teachers who were women felt. Whenever we talked about Wendy Davis, I was a graduate student at the time when she did this 14-hour filibuster and what it meant to be in a different state and watch this thing happen for what she was doing for women in Texas. Leticia Vandeputte happened to stand up and say a very poignant and palpable thing during that filibuster. And I remember screaming in my office whenever I was watching it because I had to watch it in my office. and also kind of a weird, tumultuous like relationship with Barbara Jordan, because Barbara Jordan is a woman of color. And so really every time I was learning about something from her, it was always in February. Simple as that. And it wasn't, I don't remember very much about her in history books, but it was always in February because they were like, oh, you're Black. Here's a card to read, right? Beyonce was probably the most palpable one because I've grown up with Beyonce. And even outside of the Academy, when you meet me as a regular person, she is my everything. I'm a huge fan. Every time I've gone to her concerts, I bawled my eyes out. I'm that person. But part of what's palpable about the relationship with Beyonce is that I grew up with her. And so much of what she has done in terms of her albums with Destiny's Child, and then now her being a solo artist, matched different points of my upbringing and growing up of what it meant to like evolve and become a feminist, but also just unabashedly love the place that you're from. Every time she has an album, she talks about the fact that she's from Houston, Texas, and that she's from Texas, and what that representation means for me, being also a woman from Texas, and being excited to see that, right? And of course, the last was my mother and my grandmother, which in tandem with all of these very powerful women, finding the power that I got from them, because they were my first directions and my first lessons about what it meant to be a feminist. And I say very clearly in the show, these are women, both of my mother and my grandmother have passed away, but these are women during their time who wouldn't quite exactly narratize themselves as feminists, but the actions that they did, standing up for women, fighting for women, they were the one. By those actions, that is feminist to me. And so that's how I was working through a lot of those particular relationships. And I wanted to leave it open in those experiences. This is my talk, not yours. I wanted to leave it open for those experiences so that audience members could like try to help like make sense of the people in their lives who were women, who were impactful in those ways.
No, very good. Let me continue because I believe the follow-up here from Tommy is heading in a through line direction.
So in the start feminist, you highlight your life, your mom and your grandma. In the Houstonian magazine, you mentioned there is vulnerability, but you are willing to share those stories. Can you share some of that now?
This is a tough one. When it comes to kind of like being vulnerable about your family in a high profile situation, whether you're writing a book or a memoir, or even if you're posting something about your family via Facebook. Just a extra like side note, like today's my older sister's birthday, and so I have already lined up a picture of my older sister when she was a baby, so I can like be like happy birthday. But part of like exposing yourself in those particular ways, it's a balance of it being freeing, but also like a little terrifying, because you know that there's a fear that you might get it wrong, or when you think about experiences in your past, you're like, well, maybe I saw it wrong, or that like it didn't happen in certain ways. But I had to, going over it over and over again, I had to trust myself in those voices, and it allowed me to be okay with feeling vulnerable. And also, once I was telling those stories about my grandmother and my mother, particularly about my grandmother, in my show I talk about an experience. My grandmother was 4'9". I am biracial, and so she's Japanese, and so she was a very, very small Japanese woman, but she would stand up to anyone, and she loved her grandkids a lot. So, and if she felt like her grandkids were getting less than, she could be a bully about it. But what I learned about that is that like she would also stand up for the other women in her neighborhood in her own way. And even then I was just like, oh, it's just my grandma. But now I can be reflective in those moments of like, thank you, grandma, for showing me what activism looks like. It doesn't always have to be, I have a bullhorn. Sometimes it is just like, we're going to let the next door neighbor and the 2 kids stay over tonight because mom needs a break. Their mom needs a break, or she needs help. Or why don't or I'm just going to go, you stay here. I'm going to go and take care of some people right now. And we're going to make dinner. This isn't for you. This is for that family across the street. That is activism. And that is feminism. And it's in those smaller moments that laid the foundation for who I am right now. But I would not get there if I wasn't allowing myself to get vulnerable and being honest about it, and also pushing myself enough to say it, to speak it into existence, and not just like, let me think about a time about my grandma. Oh, that was a thing, right? Speaking it out gave me the affirmation. And every time I performed the show, it was affirmation over and over again. I could see like people get emotional or whatever. Or after the show, people would be like, my grandma did this, or my mom did this, or my great grandma did this, or my auntie did this, right? We can relate to these experiences, and it made my experience of feminism accessible. That was a little bit of a diatribe, my apologies, but yeah, that's what I believe the power of vulnerability does. It allows us to like make sense of those experiences, but it also allows us to like, allowed for me in those experiences to find some gratitude.
It's a powerful word, Andrea, and I would only add that it's a conversation. Try not to force, because we understand language can leads to volatility too, and how we present information is as significant as what the information is, because if we're posing it in a certain way that's putting an audience or putting an individual in conversation on the defensive, then their shields are up, then they're not open to engaging in a dialogue, or just to be receptive to the exchange, to the gift of what's being shared. And you are blending this combination of activism and feminism, two different things. But I mean, you're talking about both accurately, and what you made me think of in terms of activism and what you shared here is akin to how I often have to unpack feminism for our student audiences. What if we're on a video or a written discussion board, or maybe in the classroom, is, you know, one of the foremost stereotypes about that word is that it's a singular thing, and that it's, you know, that it's purely antagonistic in its singular nature. And I think one of its richest qualities is that it is pluralistic, and that it's deeply layered through various meanings and shared histories. And that, I mean, that's, you know, a beautiful thing, but it's stirring and it's important. So I appreciate you sharing that with us and tackling this question. Tommy has a third question. So we've got a nice, I was encouraging her to couple up, do a question, follow-up question. So we do have a second formal question here.
I also raise awareness for cause.
Let me back up. I didn't mean to step over her words.
Lastly, I also raise awareness for cause. I'm a little person, and I try to raise dwarfism awareness with every encounter I make. What advice would you have for me or for others who try to raise awareness in different social aspects? Thank you.
I think it's about knowing the multiple modes of media. And I say to people, and this is what I say to my own students, is that if you feel like you want to speak out on something, do it. Even if you feel like it's a little bit half-baked, or you're like, I'm unsure, try it on and see, right? And because even though, and I know I've spoken in previous question where like, whenever I'm on social media, like I think about the audience and then I think about impact and intentionality. But that's what works for me. If you are just starting out in your activist stance, right, you got to figure out who you are when it comes to it. And so if you feel comfortable in spaces where you wish to speak out, do it. Every single time, right? But it's also about knowing the medium and knowing the room and knowing the situation. I'll use a kind of a caveat. One of the things I tell my students in class is that like we have grandparents or great grandparents to which we love very much, and it takes them a little bit to like catch up on how words that we say or ideas that we use or anything, right? If you come in, you know, and kick the door down and be like, Nana, we don't say that anymore, you're going to hurt Nana's feelings every single time. And then Nana's really not going to want to talk to you, right? It's about adjusting how you talk to Nana and be like, Nana, I know that you say that like this, but we now say this, right? To kind of encourage, to speak in a way that encourages dialogue, right? And that's one way that you can probably try to think about how to like be an activist on different social fronts. Another one that I like to say is that if you feel uncomfortable, because sometimes it is not like when people say that they are against something, they don't even know that they're against something, right? It comes out in the frame of a joke or a snide remark or a side comment, if you will. And if it stirs something in you, if you feel comfortable, the easiest way to kind of check somebody on that or to get a dialogue going or to promote activism is to simply say, what do you mean by that? And make them respond, right? Or if they're telling a joke, well, why is that funny? And make them respond. And what I'm going to challenge y'all to do whenever you're doing this is stay quiet and have unwavering eye contact. So you force them to respond, because here silence is powerful, because you want them to do the thing of like, well, I didn't mean it that way. I mean, I just think that blah, blah, blah. You want them to keep talking because you want them to get to a point where they recognize, oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? And sometimes it just, for me, I like to also keep pushing at them where I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what do you mean by that? Okay, well, but why is that funny? Help me understand. Walk me through why. And it gets down, right? And usually sometimes they get dismissive where they're like, well, I don't mean it like that. And I'm like, but you said it. So help me understand what's the context here. And by doing that, it's not me being like, we don't say that, or you're dumb for saying that, or you need to believe this, or get out of here. It is simply me being like, walk me through the conversation. Now my dog thinks it's playtime. Walk me through the conversation of why something is important to you in terms of language. And that means you're trying to make yourself open for a communicative experience, but you're also making yourself open for dialogue. And it works sometimes, but not all of the time, because sometimes you may not be in a space to want to teach people. But if you feel comfortable to like engage or want to push for dialogue, then I think that that's a good way to do that. But it comes down to knowing, to feeling comfortable to try and speak out for it, but also knowing the medium, if you will.
The medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan once wrote, and we often remind students, and context is everything. It's only more complicated by these shades of mass mediums and social media, and we have these conversations all the time now about increasing our filters in healthy ways, but knowing what a great tool you've offered us today, right? Knowing when to ask the sharp question with a stoic resolve, right? And what that does is it's not really escalating anything to put someone on the defensive. It's demonstrating a kind of awareness and a temperance, and what a healthy suggestion. Let's close out with Avery.
Okay.
She has a pair of questions to wrap things up here.
Professor Castleberry. My name is Avery Gregory, and I am a graduating senior from Mid-America Christian University. I've got 2 questions for you today. And the first one is, how did your experience writing The Lone Star Feminist and being an outspoken advocate for women's rights help you shape your role as a professor?
Okay, so a little bit different, gives you a little more room to kind of play here from everything you've shared with us thus far. Talk to us about the interconnectedness between maybe like creating a show like this versus where it comes from in terms of your space in the classroom, or how it informs your growth in the classroom.
I'm going to start first. I'm going to hit a bunch of points here. I'm going to start first about how it informs everything I do. And then I'll talk about what it means to be a performer and do it. And it means to be a teacher or activist to do it, right? Being a feminist or being an activist informs everything. And it shapes, forms, moves everything that I do. And it has been, and part of the process of the show, it's been coming. Like when I look back in my own life trajectory where I saw bits and pieces where I'm like, I can see my development into me saying, hi, my name is Andrea and I'm a feminist, right? Because it's not like I woke up and was like, all right, feminist time. There was lots of negotiation in spaces. There are times that I got it wrong, or I didn't even speak up for anybody, or I was like, no, that's not me, right? I had to like work through so much of it for me to get to that particular point. And now that I am there, it allows me to be, I feel like it makes me a stronger activist because I can see, or not clearly, but I can, whenever I talk to people, I can see where they are in their variations of that, right? If they're completely turned off by me saying that I'm a feminist, if they're like, oh, I believe you if it's on the test, or if they're like, I've only said it to you, but I have a very conservative family who does not believe in any of this, right? Or if they're like, I've been with you since day one, let's go. It allows me to have that accessibility because I know that I've been on that journey and been in multiple ways of that, how that works, right? It doesn't mean that I lead with it in every time I meet someone where I'm like, hello, and person I'm meeting at a baby shower, I'm feminist. But it does mean that whenever I have these conversations or when I'm talking to other people, it colors the way that I see or experience or receive information now. And sometimes that is good, sometimes that is bad, because then I have to like receive information. I'm like, oh, is this the time to clock this random person that I am seeing at this yoga class? It's not. Okay. Or sometimes it will be like, oh, look at you. You're your friend of like 5 years. Let's have a conversation, right? But it does color all of that. And regardless of what you believe in, if you are an activist for something, you got to be okay with it coloring and shaping and changing the rest of your existence. Now, when I think about it as a performer, what it does for me is it's a different culpability to kind of do this presentation whenever I'm performing, because people are coming in to see a show. So they know that there's an element of entertainment that is there, right? And so, and there is, I find myself, I like to think that I'm a good performer. I like to think that I'm very charming and fun, but also can pull the feelings out of people. But a large part of that entertainment aspect of it means that I've got to do things. I think about what it means to be a feminist, or how to communicate being a feminist, and how can I hold an audience attention for 55 minutes? Because we can say it in passing. I can write a post about it. I can write a little, I can put a hashtag on something, and that takes that long. But 50 minutes is a different type of animal. And once I was able to kind of accomplish that, it made it easier for people to have questions. Every time I did the show at lots of college campuses all over the place. I knew that they were all writing papers. And so whenever they were asking questions, they had their notes out, and I was like, I can tell paper time, it's fine. But one of the bigger ones that came out that was unanimous at every college was like, I now know how to talk to my mom, or I now know how to talk to enter person's name about what this means to me, right? This thing that I believe in, but I don't have a language for yet. And if I can get people talking to, it's not that I want people to leave a theater and be like, I'm a feminist now. I want people to be like, let's talk about how she talked about that one thing. If we can get people talking, that's how they learn. Now, when it comes to who I am as an activist and as a teacher, it's about working with people to spark the dialogue. And if you've remember when we were all in like face-to-face classrooms, right? Or if you're in a dialogue-based classroom, sometimes it's hard to get people talking. So if I come in and I'm like, let's talk about feminism, y'all hit me with the crickets. Or just, I say that, you know what this is. And I hope when you're watching this video, you're giggling because you know what that is, right? No one wants to talk. It's quiet. All of a sudden, the AC vent is loud. Someone decides to open candy in that very moment, right? But I have to get people warmed up to have that conversation, right? But it means sometimes you're watching people have those conversations for the first time, right? Where they're like, I think feminism is my mom baked cookies, and right, and you're watching the ball roll slowly, but it means having the patience to let people get to where they're going, right? Whenever they're speaking about it. What it means for me as an activist is it means that I want to advocate and support women of all genders. And what that means is, it doesn't mean that I want to convert every person to feminism where I'm like, all right, let's all do feminism in the exact way that I want to. No, it means that if you are a woman or identify as a woman, I want to support you in the way that you are. If you are someone who would like to have 2 kids and a dog and be a housewife, I got your back, homie. If you would like to be the next president, I got your back, homie. If you were like, I don't even know what I want to do, but I think I do want to just like sit and hula hoop at the park, I have your back. I want to be able to be supportive of women, and what that means for me, it just means that, like, whatever you need, or if you need something, how can we advocate for it, where you have the time and the space to do so, or let's have conversations with people who can help, right? And so it encompasses, my activism encompasses all three of those things.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Final question from Avery.
Okay.
Here we go.
And then my second question is, with Texas being viewed as very conservative and to be a part of the Bible Belt, how were you able to push past that and come to a place where you were comfortable with representing your views and opinions? Thank you.
All righty.
You're so great at anticipating types of questions, and it's really about, it highlights your communicative, prowess, the ability to kind of get on a wavelength, even in an asynchronous space, as our questions have been, and join that sort of thought process journey. I'm having a meta moment. You're describing these qualities, and I'm observing you acting them out in a real live time. That's also, archived to help students that need to be learning at different times. Is there anything on top of what you've shared, or
Sure.
was that really part of the package that you've presented overall?
Yeah, I would say this one thing, and I'm going to relate it to where you guys are, because y'all live in Oklahoma, and I know y'all know Texans get mad heat. I know y'all get heat too, and often from many Texans. I get it. It's fine. Whenever I was thinking about regionality, which is the term I'm kind of researching right now, part of the understanding whenever I did this show, what I had to make sense of what it meant to be a Texan, was that I had to take the good and the bad of what it meant, because I was very proud. I still am very proud to be a Texan. It's where I was raised. It's what formulated who I am as a person and how I communicate to other people. I love the fact that, like, Texans are friendly. We say y'all, and it encompasses all of these magical things. I had to love that, but I also had to take with that love all the things that are not so great about our state, right? That we are conservative, and that does not sit well with a lot of people. That a lot of that conservatism lies itself in very problematic behaviors against people of color and women and indigenous folks and people across the LGBTQ spectrum and different able bodies and all of that, right? The list goes on in regards to that. Then in order for me to say who I am, I have to know that both of those things are a part of me, because I can never say, oh, I hate being from, or I hate this part of me, because it's saying that I hate a part of myself. And so it's about finding the balance of what it means to be from a region, and also accepting it, both good and bad. And that goes up and down all day. There'll be times where I'm like, yes, I'm from Texas, because Beyonce just released a song with Megan Thee Stallion, and I was like, yes, yeah, agenda. And then it will flip, and I'll see something on the news, and I'm like, oh, no, from it. But I have to take the good with the bad, and it allowed me to it allows me on most days to find a peace for the regionality, but also that, like, there's a richness in culture from the places that we are. I mean, like I said, many of y'all are Oklahomans. Oklahomans, yes. And there's such a richness and history about it. And if I say that where we're from is not important, I am saying that those stories and that culture is not important. And we know that it is. So there's that.
Okies. It's Okies, right? We're Okies.
You're Okies, yes. And it's okay to be an Okie.
Even if they're barefoot and whatever.
Riding horses and
riding horse, barefoot horseback riders. This has been such an enriching conversation, Andrea. I thank you for connecting with us, for opening up, for sharing not only what you do with this, but who you are. And really what you've allowed is us to understand how those things are simpatico, how they're part of a fluid whole. And not only a bevy of rich takeaways, but also key terms, right? People can go I hope they have an extra browser open so they can be Googling some of these fantastic terms that you've introduced for us, giving us ideas, thoughts, inspirations. I think there is so much carryover between what you do and its own distinctions versus very different things that our students, the digital marketing majors or whoever, will be involved in the coming months and years. It's exciting to see the continuity between these areas, between our passions, and if there are three words that could describe you, I believe passion or passionate would be one of them. And what a wonderful, what a proud thing. I guess the other two would be Texan and
And Black. It's fine.
Hey, we don't have to limit this to a top three. What kind of numerical hierarchy is this anyway, right? So I always steer students away from questions that try to too narrowly define the response. For example, I often advise never to ask, what is your favorite blank? What is your favorite this and that? And some of that is entirely like my own experience of, don't ask me what my favorite, like, what about the plurality of favorite things? Like, I appreciate the nuances of this and that, right? And that categorization is both fun and, can be limiting in their own ways. Anyway, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. The session, enlightening. It's amazing to hear from you. What a terrific job you're doing down at the University of Houston, whether you're there extended campus or traveling around, right? Engaging with others. Well, what an exciting life, and it'll be exciting to hear more about what you're doing in the future. Are there any shows you're working on? Any sort of like things in that you want to plug toward the end?
It's not quite a plug yet because it's all pending pandemic. But I usually do a large class production or group production. And so a couple of years ago, we did a show about Harry Potter where we recruited about 50. We have about 4,000 people on campus. We recruited about 50 people, 10 writers, 15 cast members, a large tech crew and whatnot about Harry Potter. We're going to do that same format again. But we are going to do it about Selena, and not Selena Gomez, Selena Quintanilla Perez. So like the first Selena is what people like.
Selena.
For me, the Selena. And we are working on a project there. Our university is a Hispanic serving institution. Houston is this is a huge mecca for what Selena does. 25 years ago, she had her, if you've seen the movie or not familiar with her, she had her last performance at the Houston Rodeo here, and also where she's from is about 2 hours south of here. And so we are working on pending the pandemic, when we return, we are working on a very large project where we talk about the iconography that is Selena. And so that can go, it depends on how the students tell their stories. It's going to be autoethnography based, personal narrative based, lots of pop culture references, things of that nature. So hopefully, pending pandemic, that'll go up this fall.
I love it. I love it. Maybe we even need the digital narratives, right, with social distance.
And it might happen like that way. We're working on an alternative for it. So
well, that is awesome. And so best of luck and continuing successes down there. Continue to hold the fort down, spreading the good word about performance and performance studies and blending it with these other areas of significance. It's been amazing talking to you. For our class, what a terrific session we've had. Hope you have plenty of takeaways, certainly enough to vault those interview synthesis papers where you're looking at some connections between this guest speaker series. It's been a deep, deep pleasure to be able to help host these and kind of moderate your questions, help us cultivate our voices, a significant aspect. You don't have to be a communication major to know the importance of cultivating your own voice. And that's, I mean, what an important opportunity we have to do that. But we'll look forward to those. Best of luck to our seniors. This summer class could very well be your final course ever. And to that we say, great successes ahead. Good luck. Stay in touch with your advisors, with the university. Let us know how those paths are progressing, unfolding, so we can share in your victories, large and small, and look forward to having some, or perhaps seeing others in the future in our curriculum, whether it's on ground or online. We're certainly offering both all the time, but for COM 4603, creating social media presence and cultural movements, thank you all for joining in this session and series.